Ezra Blackwood had been talking to his cattle for so long, he'd almost forgotten what it felt like to have a human voice answer back. 15 years of solitude stretched behind him like the endless Montana plains, each day bleeding into the next with the reliable monotony of sunrise, work, and sunset. The Blackwood Ranch sat nestled in a valley surrounded by snow-capped peaks that seemed to touch the very heavens. But for all its breathtaking beauty, it might as well have been a prison. He stood at the split-rail fence that morning, same as every morning, watching his prize Herefords graze in the golden meadow. At 37, Ezra was still a strong man, with broad shoulders and hands that could gentle a spooked horse or mend any broken thing on his property. Everything except the one thing that mattered most, the hollow ache in his chest that had settled there the day he'd buried his parents and realized he was truly alone in the world. "Morning, ladies," he said to the cows, tipping his weathered brown hat. "Looks like another fine day to pretend we're not going crazy out here." Bessie, his favorite Holstein, lifted her head and regarded him with those large, understanding eyes that had become his closest confidant. At least the animals didn't judge him for the conversations he held with himself while mending fences, or the way he sometimes set two plates at dinner out of pure habit, only to put one back when reality crept in. The nearest neighbor was 12 miles away, and the closest town, if you could call Millerville's collection of weathered buildings a town, sat another 8 miles beyond that. Ezra made the journey twice a month for supplies, enduring the pitying looks from the store clerks and the whispered conversations that stopped when he approached. "Poor Ezra Blackwood," they'd say, "living all alone on that big spread. Shame he never found himself a wife." But what they didn't understand was that Ezra had stopped looking years ago. After watching his father work himself to death, trying to keep the ranch afloat, and his mother waste away from loneliness shortly after, he'd convinced himself that some men were meant for solitude. The ranch needed him, the animals depended on him, and that was enough. It had to be enough. The morning breeze carried the scent of wildflowers and fresh mountain air as Ezra walked back toward the house, his boots crunching on the gravel path he'd worn smooth with 15 years of the same routine. The two-story farmhouse stood proud against the dramatic backdrop of the Rockies, its wraparound porch and neat flower boxes, a testament to his determination to maintain something beautiful in his isolated world. But as he reached for the kitchen door, something made him pause. A sound that didn't belong. The distant rumble of an approaching wagon, still too far away to see but close enough to make his heart skip a beat. In 15 years, unexpected visitors could be counted on one hand, and none of them had brought good news. What Ezra didn't know was that the woman riding in that wagon was just as lost as he was, carrying a secret that would shatter his carefully constructed solitude and prove that sometimes the best things in life arrive exactly when you least expect them. The wagon that rolled up Ezra's drive looked like it had seen better days, its paint faded and one wheel wobbling with each rotation. But it was the passenger that made Ezra's breath catch in his throat. A young woman in the finest traveling dress he'd ever seen, complete with pearl buttons and lace trim that probably cost more than he spent on supplies in 6 months. She stepped down from the wagon with the careful grace of someone unaccustomed to rough terrain, her leather boots clearly made for city sidewalks rather than Montana dirt. A large brown suitcase sat beside her on the wagon bed, and she clutched a small reticule in her gloved hands as she surveyed the ranch with wide, uncertain eyes. "This is the Fairmont property, isn't it?" she asked the wagon driver, a grizzled old man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Ma'am, I told you 3 times already. This here's the Blackwood Ranch." "Ain't no Fairmonts in these parts," the driver replied, spitting tobacco juice into the dust. "You sure you got the right address?" The woman pulled a crumpled piece of paper from her reticule and studied it with growing distress. The telegram said Fairmont Ranch, Montana Territory, Valley View Road. She looked up at the towering mountains surrounding them. This certainly looks like a valley. Ezra found himself walking toward them, drawn by curiosity and something else he couldn't quite name. Up close, the woman was even more striking. Honey-colored hair arranged in an elaborate style beneath a traveling hat adorned with silk flowers, and green eyes that reminded him of spring meadows after rain. "Excuse me," Ezra said, removing his hat out of ingrained politeness. "I couldn't help but overhear." I'm Ezra Blackwood, and this is my ranch. Are you looking for someone specific? The woman turned those remarkable eyes on him, and Ezra felt something stir in his chest that had been dormant for 15 years. Oh, I'm terribly sorry to disturb you, Mr. Blackwood. I'm Evangeline Fairmont, but everyone calls me Eva. I was supposed to be meeting my cousin Margaret at the Fairmont Ranch, but I'm beginning to suspect I may have gotten on the wrong train in Denver. Fairmont Ranch, Ezra repeated, scratching his jaw. Can't say I know of any Fairmonts around here. The closest ranch to mine is the Henderson place, about 12 miles north. Could that be what you're looking for? Eva's face fell, and she sank onto the wagon's tailgate with a rustle of silk skirts. Oh dear! Oh dear! This is a disaster! She pressed a hand to her forehead, and Ezra noticed the slight tremor in her fingers. I specifically asked the conductor for the stop closest to Fairmont Ranch, and he assured me this was correct. The wagon driver cleared his throat impatiently. Lady, I gotta get back to town before dark. You want me to take you back to the station? The next train doesn't come through for 3 days, Eva said quietly, more to herself than anyone else. And I don't have enough money for a hotel room for 3 nights. Ezra found himself studying her more closely. Beneath the obvious quality of her clothing and the refined manner of her speech, there was something desperate in her eyes. She was running from something. He'd bet his best bull on it. Miss Fairmont, Ezra said carefully, would you mind me asking where you traveled from? Boston, she replied without thinking, then quickly added, most recently from Denver. I was visiting friends. The way she said friends told Ezra everything he needed to know. This elegant city woman was fleeing something or someone, and she'd managed to get herself stranded in the middle of the Montana wilderness with nowhere to go. Well now, Ezra said, surprising himself with the words that came out of his mouth. Seems to me you're in a bit of a predicament. My ranch isn't much, but it's got a spare room and 3 meals a day. You're welcome to stay until the next train comes through, if you don't mind simple country living. Eva's eyes widened. Oh, I couldn't possibly impose on your kindness, Mr. Blackwood. We've only just met, and I'm sure you have quite enough to manage without taking in a stranger. Ma'am, the wagon driver interrupted, it's getting late, and I ain't keen on making this trip in the dark. You gonna ride back with me, or not? Eva looked between the driver and Ezra, clearly torn. Ezra could see the internal battle playing out across her expressive features, pride warring with necessity, fear competing with hope. I assure you, Miss Fairmont, my intentions are entirely honorable, Ezra said quietly. I've got a housekeeper who comes in twice a week, Mrs. Henderson from the neighboring ranch. She'll vouch for my character if you need references. That seemed to tip the scales. Eva stood up, smoothing her skirts with hands that only shook slightly. You're very kind, Mr. Blackwood. I accept your generous offer, but only until I can arrange proper transportation. The wagon driver looked relieved as he unloaded her suitcase and collected his fare. Within minutes, the sound of his departure faded into the distance, leaving Ezra and Eva standing alone in the ranch yard, with nothing but mountain wind and cattle lowing in the distance to break the sudden silence. So, Ezra said, picking up her suitcase and noting its considerable weight, welcome to the Blackwood Ranch. It's not much compared to what you're probably used to, but it's home. Eva looked around at the well-maintained buildings, the neat fences, and the spectacular view of snow-capped peaks. It's beautiful, she said, and he could hear genuine appreciation in her voice. I've never seen mountains like these. Gets a man to thinking about bigger things, Ezra agreed, then caught himself. He hadn't talked this much to another human being in months, and certainly never to a woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a fashion plate. As they walked toward the house, Eva stumbling slightly on the uneven ground, Ezra found himself stealing glances at his unexpected guest. Everything about her spoke of refinement and privilege, from the way she held herself to the soft leather of her gloves. What could possibly have driven someone like her to flee to the frontier? Mr. Blackwood, Eva said as they reached the porch steps, I hope you won't think me terribly forward, but may I ask how long you've lived here alone? 15 years, Ezra replied automatically, then wondered why he'd been so honest. Lost my parents young, never saw fit to change the arrangement. Eva paused at the top of the steps, her hand resting on the porch railing. 15 years, she repeated softly. That's a very long time to be alone. Gets quiet sometimes, Ezra admitted, then quickly added, but the land keeps a man busy. As he opened the front door and gestured for her to enter, Ezra couldn't shake the feeling that his carefully ordered world was about to change in ways he couldn't begin to imagine. For 15 years, he'd maintained perfect control over every aspect of his life. Now, with one wrong train and a desperate woman's arrival, that control felt as fragile as morning frost. But what surprised him most was that for the first time in 15 years, he wasn't entirely sure he wanted to maintain that control. Something about Evangeline Fairmont's green eyes and the mystery surrounding her arrival made him think that maybe, just maybe, some changes were worth the risk. As Eva stepped across his threshold, her silk skirts rustling against the doorframe, Ezra realized he was about to discover whether a man could survive having his whole world turned upside down by one beautiful stranger who'd gotten off at the wrong stop. The first sign that Evangeline Fairmont was not cut out for ranch life came at dawn, when Ezra's rooster let out its morning call, and she tumbled out of bed with a shriek that could have awakened the dead. "What in heaven's name was that?" Eva called from the guest room, her voice muffled by the thick wooden door. Ezra, who'd been up for an hour already tending to the morning chores, couldn't help but smile. "That's just Cornelius announcing the start of another day, Miss Fairmont." "Nothing to worry about." "You named your rooster Cornelius," came her incredulous reply. "Well, he's got a mighty important job," Ezra said, setting down his coffee cup. "Figured he deserved a dignified name." 20 minutes later, Eva emerged from her room looking like she'd been through a hurricane. Her carefully arranged traveling costume had been replaced by a simple blue dress that was still finer than anything worn in these parts, but her hair had escaped its pins and hung in loose waves around her shoulders. The effect was decidedly more appealing than her previous pristine appearance, though Ezra kept that observation to himself. "I don't suppose you have any coffee?" she asked hopefully, settling gingerly into one of the kitchen chairs as if she expected it to collapse beneath her. "Fresh pot on the stove," Ezra said, pouring her a cup. "Fair warning, though, it's cowboy coffee. Might be stronger than what you're used to in Boston." Eva took a tentative sip and her eyes immediately began to water. "Good gracious," she gasped. "What did you put in this?" "Gunpowder? Just coffee and hot water, ma'am." "You'll get used to it." "I sincerely doubt that," Eva muttered, but she took another sip anyway. "Mr. Blackwood, I hope you don't mind me asking, but what exactly does one do on a ranch all day? I've never been anywhere more rural than my cousin's summer house in the Berkshires." Ezra leaned against the kitchen counter, studying this refined woman who looked as out of place in his simple kitchen as a peacock in a hen house. "Well, there's always something that needs doing. Cattle to tend, fences to mend, hay to cut, horses to train. Keeps a man busy from sunup to sundown. And you do all of this by yourself?" "For the most part, I hire extra hands during calving season and harvest time, but the rest of the year it's just me and the animals." Eva stared out the kitchen window at the vast expanse of pasture land dotted with grazing cattle. "Aren't you terribly lonely?" The question hit closer to home than Ezra cared to admit. "A man learns to find company where he can," he said carefully. "Speaking of which, I need to get started on the morning rounds. You're welcome to stay inside where it's comfortable, or if you're feeling adventurous, you could come along and see how a ranch operates." Eva straightened in her chair, and Ezra caught a glimpse of steel beneath her refined exterior. "I think I'd like that very much, Mr. Blackwood. But I should warn you, I have absolutely no experience with farm animals. The closest I've come to livestock is the carriage horses in Boston Common." "We'll start slow," Ezra promised, trying to hide his amusement. An hour later, Ezra was beginning to regret his generous offer. Eva's first encounter with the chickens had resulted in a minor catastrophe when she'd attempted to collect eggs while wearing her good gloves, only to have an indignant hen fly directly at her face. Her scream had spooked half the flock, and they'd spent 20 minutes chasing feathers and recovering scattered eggs. "I'm beginning to understand why people pay others to bring them eggs," Eva said, brushing dirt from her skirts and glaring at the chicken coop with wounded pride. "It gets easier with practice," Ezra assured her, though he was privately wondering if this delicate city woman would survive a single day of actual ranch work. Their next stop was the barn, where Ezra kept his prize horses. Ava seemed more at ease here, running her hands along the smooth necks of the mares with genuine appreciation. "They're beautiful," she said, watching a chestnut mare nuzzle her palm in search of treats. "What's her name?" "That's Sunset," Ezra said, producing a handful of sugar cubes from his pocket. "She's got the sweetest temperament of any horse I've ever worked with." Eva fed the mare carefully, her face lighting up when Sunset whickered softly and nuzzled her shoulder. "She likes me." "Animals are good judges of character," Ezra observed, and was rewarded with a smile that made his chest tighten unexpectedly. The real test came when they reached the cattle pasture. Ezra's Herefords were gentle as cattle went, but they were still massive animals that could intimidate experienced ranch hands, let alone a woman who probably weighed less than one of their legs. "They're enormous," Eva breathed, stopping short at the fence line. "Big as they are, they're mostly harmless," Ezra said. "Cattle are herd animals. They're more afraid of you than you are of them." "I find that highly unlikely," Eva replied, but she allowed him to help her climb through the fence rails. Bessie, ever curious about newcomers, wandered over to investigate. Eva froze as the massive Holstein approached, her green eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fascination. "Just let her smell you," Ezra instructed softly. "Keep your movements slow and steady." Eva held perfectly still as Bessie's enormous head came within inches of her face, the cow's warm breath ruffling the loose strands of her hair. Then, to everyone's surprise, Bessie gave Eva's cheek a gentle, rough-tongued lick. "Oh!" Eva exclaimed, reaching up to touch the spot where she'd been kissed. "She's actually quite sweet, isn't she?" "Bessie's always been a good judge of people," Ezra said, and found himself meaning it. There was something about the way Eva had stood her ground, scared but determined, that impressed him more than he cared to admit. By midday, Eva had successfully fed the horses, managed to collect a dozen eggs without casualties, and even helped Ezra repair a section of fence that had been damaged by the previous night's wind. Her dress was thoroughly ruined, her hair had completely escaped its pins, and there was a smudge of dirt across her nose, but she looked more genuinely happy than she had since arriving. "I can see why you love it here," she said, settling onto the porch steps with a glass of cool water. "It's hard work, but there's something satisfying about it. In Boston, I never felt like I accomplished anything meaningful." "What did you do in Boston?" Ezra asked, settling beside her with his own glass. Eva's expression grew guarded. "Oh, the usual things expected of a woman in my position. Social calls, charity committees, planning dinner parties." She paused, twisting her hands in her lap. "My father owns several textile mills. I was being groomed to marry well and enhance the family's social standing." "Was being groomed?" Eva looked out at the mountains, her voice growing quiet. "Let's just say that the gentleman my father selected for me had very different ideas about marriage than I did." Ezra felt a flash of anger at the pain in her voice. "What kind of different ideas?" "The kind that involve a wife being seen and not heard, producing heirs on command, and never having an opinion about anything more controversial than flower arrangements." Eva's hands clenched into fists. "Reginald Hampton is everything my father wants in a son-in-law. Wealthy, connected, respectable. Unfortunately, he's also cruel, controlling, and has hands that wander where they are not welcome." The protective instinct that surged through Ezra was so strong it surprised him. "So you ran." "So I ran," Eva confirmed. "I was supposed to marry him next month. Instead, I took every dollar I could lay my hands on, bought a train ticket, and hoped to lose myself in the frontier until I could figure out what to do next." "And you ended up here by accident." Eva turned to look at him, and Ezra was struck by the vulnerability in her green eyes. "The funny thing is, I'm beginning to think it wasn't an accident at all. Maybe I was meant to get off at the wrong stop." Before Ezra could respond to that loaded statement, the sound of approaching hoofbeats echoed across the valley. Both of them turned to see a rider coming up the drive at full gallop, dust streaming behind his horse like a battle flag. "That's Tom Henderson from the neighboring ranch," Ezra said, rising to his feet with a frown. He wouldn't ride that hard unless something was wrong. Tom pulled up in front of the porch, his horse lathered with sweat and his face grim. "Ezra, thank God you're here." There are 3 men in town asking questions about a woman who matches your guest description. They're offering a $50 reward for information about her whereabouts. Eva went white as fresh snow. Reginald, she whispered, he found me. Ezra looked between Tom's worried face and Eva's terrified expression and felt 15 years of peaceful solitude cracking like ice in a spring thaw. Whatever had driven this woman to his doorstep, it was bigger and more dangerous than he'd realized. But as he looked at Eva's stricken face, Ezra knew with absolute certainty that he wasn't going to let anyone take her away, not without a fight. The color drained from Eva's face so completely that Ezra thought she might faint right there on the porch steps. Her hands trembled as she gripped the railing, and he could see the rapid rise and fall of her chest as panic set in. "How many men?" Ezra asked Tom, his voice taking on a hard edge that hadn't been there moments before. "3 of them," Tom replied, dismounting from his lathered horse. "Well-dressed city types, but they've got the look of hired muscle about them. The kind of men who get paid to bring people back, whether they want to come or not." Eva stood up abruptly, swaying slightly. "I have to leave. Right now. I won't bring this trouble to your doorstep, Mr. Blackwood. You've been nothing but kind to me, and You're not going anywhere," Ezra said firmly, surprising himself with the conviction in his voice. "Tom, what exactly did these men say?" Tom glanced nervously at Eva before continuing. "They showed a photograph around Miller's General Store. Asked if anyone had seen a young woman, about 23 years old, dark blonde hair, traveling alone. Said she was Reginald Hampton's fiancée and that she'd suffered some kind of nervous breakdown, run off in confusion." "Nervous breakdown," Eva repeated bitterly. Of course that's what Reginald would tell people. Much more palatable than admitting his bride to be fled rather than marry him. "They're saying she needs medical attention," Tom continued. Made it sound like they were concerned for her welfare, but something about them didn't sit right with me. Sheriff Morrison seemed to believe their story, though. Ezra felt his jaw clench. Sheriff Morrison was a decent enough man, but he had a tendency to see what he wanted to see, especially when well-dressed gentlemen with money were involved. "Did they say where they were staying?" Ezra asked. "Took rooms at the boarding house." "But Ezra, that's not the worst of it." Tom's expression grew even more grim. "Old Pete at the livery said they were asking about road maps, specifically any routes that led to isolated ranches in the area. They're planning to search every homestead until they find her." Eva sank back down onto the steps, her face buried in her hands. "This is all my fault. I should have known Reginald wouldn't just let me disappear. His pride wouldn't allow it." "What kind of man is this Hampton fellow?" Ezra asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Eva looked up, and the haunted expression in her green eyes made Ezra's hands curl into fists. "The kind who believes that women are property to be owned and controlled. The kind who thinks a firm hand and absolute obedience are the foundations of a proper marriage." She paused, then added quietly, "The kind who left bruises on my wrists when I tried to refuse his proposal." The rage that swept through Ezra was white-hot and immediate. In 15 years of solitude, he'd forgotten what it felt like to want to protect someone, to feel genuinely angry on another person's behalf. But the thought of anyone laying violent hands on this brave-spirited woman made him see red. "He won't touch you again," Ezra said, and his voice carried a promise that made both Eva and Tom look at him with surprise. "Not while you're under my protection." "Ezra," Tom said carefully, "these men have money and legal authority. If she really is Hampton's fiancée, she's a grown woman who has the right to choose her own path." Ezra interrupted. "Last I checked, this was still America, not some feudal kingdom where women get sold off like cattle." Eva stared at him with something approaching wonder. "You would really stand against them? For me? You barely know me." "I know enough," Ezra replied simply. "I know you're brave enough to risk everything for your freedom. I know you're kind to animals and willing to work hard even when it's unfamiliar. And I know that any man who would hurt a woman isn't worthy of the name." Before Eva could respond, the sound of multiple horses approaching at a steady pace reached their ears. Ezra felt his stomach tighten as he counted the hoofbeats. 3 riders, just as Tom had said. "Get inside," Ezra told Eva, his voice brooking no argument. "Tom, I appreciate the warning, but you might want to head home." No sense in you getting caught up in this. Tom shook his head. I'm staying. The Hendersons don't abandon their neighbors when trouble comes calling. Eva stood but didn't move toward the house. I won't hide like a coward while you face them for me. You'll do exactly as I say, Ezra said, his tone gentle but firm. These men are here because of you, which means you're the prize they're after. Don't make it easy for them. Reluctantly, Eva retreated to the kitchen window, where she could see but hopefully not be seen. Ezra checked the rifle he kept by the front door, more out of habit than any real intention to use it, then stepped out onto the porch to wait. The three riders who came up his drive looked exactly like what Tom had described. Well-dressed city men who'd been hired to do unpleasant work. The man in the lead was tall and lean, with calculating eyes and a thin mustache that gave him a predatory appearance. His companions were larger, broader, the kind of men who solve problems with their fists. Good afternoon, the leader called out as they approached the porch. I'm looking for Ezra Blackwood. You found him, Ezra replied, not moving from his position at the top of the steps. What can I do for you, gentlemen? The man dismounted with practiced ease, his hand resting casually on the butt of the pistol at his hip. My name is Frederick Marsh. I'm employed by Mr. Reginald Hampton of Boston to locate his missing fiancée, Miss Evangeline Fairmont. We have reason to believe she may have passed through this area. Can't say I've seen anyone matching that description, Ezra said evenly. What makes you think she came this way? Marsh pulled a photograph from his jacket and held it up. Even from a distance, Ezra could see it was Eva, though the woman in the picture looked pale and subdued. Nothing like the vibrant person who'd spent the morning learning to collect eggs and befriend cattle. Miss Fairmont is suffering from a severe nervous condition, Marsh continued smoothly. She fled her family home in Boston 3 days ago in a state of confusion and distress. Mr. Hampton is naturally concerned for her welfare and eager to ensure she receives proper medical care. Sounds like quite a story, Ezra said. But like I told you, I haven't seen hide nor hair of any young ladies lately. This is pretty isolated country. Most folks stick to the main roads when they're traveling through. Marsh studied Ezra's face with the intensity of a man accustomed to reading lies. I wonder if you'd mind if we took a look around your property, just to put Mr. Hampton's mind at ease. Actually, I would mind, Ezra replied calmly. This is private property, and you don't have any legal authority to search it. If you think someone's committed a crime, you can talk to Sheriff Morrison about getting proper paperwork. One of Marsh's companions, a thick-set man with scarred knuckles, stepped forward menacingly. Now see here. Easy, Burke, Marsh said, holding up a restraining hand. Mr. Blackwood is within his rights. He turned back to Ezra with a cold smile. Of course, we'd be happy to compensate you for your time and cooperation. Mr. Hampton is prepared to offer a substantial reward for information leading to Miss Fairmont's safe return. How substantial? Tom asked from his position by the horses, playing his part perfectly. $50, Marsh replied, and another $50 if she's actually found on your property. Ezra whistled low. That's a lot of money for finding one confused woman. Miss Fairmont is very precious to Mr. Hampton, Marsh said. He's willing to pay whatever it takes to bring her home safely. Well, I appreciate the offer, Ezra said, but like I told you, she's not here. Might want to try the Morrison place. They're closer to the main road. Marsh's smile never wavered, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. You know, Mr. Blackwood, it's interesting. The train conductor in Denver remembered selling a ticket to a young woman who asked specifically about stops near Fairmont Ranch. Apparently, she was quite insistent about finding the right destination. Ezra's blood ran cold. Is that so? It is indeed. And while there is no Fairmont Ranch in this area, there is a Blackwood Ranch. Easy mistake for a confused woman to make, don't you think? The silence stretched taut between them, broken only by the wind rustling through the prairie grass and the distant lowing of cattle. Ezra could feel the weight of the moment, the decision that would determine not just Eva's fate but his own. Gentlemen, Ezra said finally, his voice carrying the quiet authority of a man who'd spent 15 years making his own rules. I'll ask you once more to leave my property. Peacefully. Marsh's hand moved incrementally closer to his gun. And if we refuse, then you'll discover that Montana hospitality has its limits. From inside the house came the distinctive sound of a rifle being cocked. and Ezra knew without looking that Eva had decided she wouldn't hide after all. The knowledge should have worried him, but instead he felt a fierce pride in this woman who refused to be cowed even when facing the men sent to drag her back to a life she despised. "It seems we have ourselves a standoff," Marsh observed with genuine amusement. "How exciting." But what none of them knew was that while they'd been talking, Sheriff Morrison had been riding hard from town, having finally realized that something about these well-dressed strangers didn't add up. And behind him rode 3 more men, ranchers who'd known Ezra Blackwood for 15 years, and weren't about to let outsiders come onto his land and make threats. The real battle was just about to begin. The tension in the ranch yard was thick enough to cut with a knife when the sound of approaching riders broke the deadly stillness. Marsh's head snapped toward the sound, his calculated composure slipping for the first time since his arrival. "Expecting company, Mr. Blackwood?" Marsh asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Sheriff Morrison crested the hill first, his badge glinting in the afternoon sun, followed by 3 local ranchers that Ezra recognized immediately. Bill Morrison, the sheriff's brother, Jake Sullivan from the Barris Ranch, and old Pete McKenzie, who'd been working cattle in these parts since before Ezra was born. "Well now," Sheriff Morrison called out as he rode into the yard. "Seems like we've got ourselves quite a gathering here." Marsh stepped forward, his professional smile sliding back into place. "Sheriff Morrison, perfect timing. We were just discussing Miss Fairmont's whereabouts with Mr. Blackwood here." "Is that so?" Morrison dismounted, his eyes taking in the tense positioning of everyone in the yard. "Funny thing, Mr. Marsh. After you gentlemen left town, I got to thinking about your story, decided to send a telegram to my counterpart in Boston, just to verify the details." Ezra saw something flicker across Marsh's face, not quite fear, but definitely concern. "The response was very interesting," Morrison continued, pulling a folded paper from his jacket. "Seems Miss Evangeline Fairmont filed a formal complaint with the Boston police 3 weeks ago, alleging that one Reginald Hampton had physically assaulted her and was attempting to force her into an unwanted marriage." The silence that followed was deafening. Eva's gasp was audible even from inside the house, and Ezra felt a surge of vindication mixed with rage. "Furthermore," Morrison continued, "the telegram states that Miss Fairmont is of legal age and sound mind, with every right to travel wherever she pleases without harassment from Mr. Hampton or his representatives." Marsh's jaw tightened. "Sheriff, I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding." "Oh, I don't think so," Morrison interrupted. "In fact, I think the misunderstanding was mine, believing your story about a confused woman needing medical help. What we've got here is a case of harassment and possibly kidnapping, depending on what you boys were planning to do if you found the lady." The 2 men flanking Marsh shifted nervously, clearly not having signed up for a confrontation with local law enforcement and armed ranchers. But Marsh himself seemed to steel his resolve. "Sheriff, you're interfering with a private family matter," Marsh said coldly. "Mr. Hampton has significant legal and financial resources at his disposal. I strongly advise you to reconsider your position." "Is that a threat?" Bill Morrison stepped forward, his hand resting on his sidearm. Despite sharing a name with the sheriff, he was twice as big and half as diplomatic. "It's simply a statement of fact," Marsh replied smoothly. "Mr. Hampton is a very influential man with connections throughout the territorial government. It would be unfortunate if this situation resulted in complications for the local community." That was when Eva stepped out of the house, the rifle held competently in her hands and fire blazing in her green eyes. "Mr. Marsh," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the yard, "you can tell Reginald Hampton that Evangeline Fairmont is no longer his concern. I am a free woman, and I choose to remain here." Marsh's eyes locked onto her like a predator spotting prey. "Miss Fairmont, thank goodness. Mr. Hampton has been beside himself with worry. Your family is desperate to see you safely returned home." "My family sold me to that monster for a business merger," Eva replied sharply. "And if Reginald Hampton was truly worried about my welfare, he wouldn't have sent armed men to drag me back against my will. Now, Miss Fairmont, your condition has clearly affected your judgment." "My condition?" Eva's voice rose dangerously. You mean my unwillingness to marry a man who thinks bruising a woman's wrists is an acceptable form of persuasion? Ezra stepped down from the porch, moving to stand between Eva and Marsh's men. I think the lady has made her position clear, gentlemen. Time for you to move along. Burke, the thick-set thug who'd been growing increasingly agitated, finally snapped. Enough of this nonsense. We came here to collect Hampton's property, and that's what we're going to do. He started toward Eva with clear intent, but never made it more than 2 steps. Ezra's fist connected with Burke's jaw in a haymaker that sent the bigger man sprawling in the dirt, and suddenly the ranch yard erupted into chaos. Marsh went for his gun, but Tom Henderson was faster, tackling the man around the waist and sending them both tumbling. The third bounty hunter, seeing his companions engaged, made a desperate lunge for Eva, only to find himself staring down the barrel of her rifle. I wouldn't, Eva said coolly, and something in her voice convinced the man she meant it. Sheriff Morrison waded into the fracas, wrestling Marsh's pistol away, while Bill Morrison and the other ranchers moved to subdue Burke, who was bleeding from his mouth but still trying to fight. Enough! Morrison shouted, firing a shot into the air that brought the immediate violence to a halt. Everyone stand down right now! When the dust settled, Marsh and his men found themselves disarmed and surrounded by very unfriendly locals. Marsh's carefully maintained composure had finally cracked, revealing the vicious thug beneath the gentleman's facade. This isn't over, Marsh snarled, spitting dirt. Hampton won't give up. He'll send more men, offer bigger rewards. That woman belongs to him. Ezra stepped forward, and when he spoke, his voice carried 15 years of bottled-up emotion and newfound purpose. Let me make something crystal clear to you and Mr. Hampton. This woman is under my protection. She's chosen to stay here of her own free will, and anyone who tries to take her away will have to go through me first. And me, Tom Henderson added firmly. And all of us, Sheriff Morrison said, gesturing to the assembled ranchers. This is our community, and we protect our own. Eva lowered the rifle, tears streaming down her face, but her voice was steady when she spoke. Mr. Marsh, when you report back to Reginald, you tell him that I'd rather spend the rest of my life as a spinster on a Montana ranch than one more day as his captive bride. Marsh struggled to his feet, brushing dirt from his expensive suit. You have no idea what you're giving up, you foolish girl. Hampton could give you everything. Wealth, position, respectability. What good is wealth when it comes with chains? Eva replied. What value does position have when it requires surrendering your soul? Sheriff Morrison stepped forward with authority. Mr. Marsh, you and your associates are no longer welcome in this county. I'm giving you 1 hour to collect your belongings and be on the next train out of Millerville. If I see you again, I'll arrest you for harassment and attempted kidnapping. You can't. I can and I will, Morrison interrupted. And if Mr. Hampton sends anyone else to bother Miss Fairmont, they'll receive the same treatment. Now get off this man's property before I decide to skip the pleasantries and just lock you up right now. As Marsh and his men mounted their horses, defeat written clearly on their faces, Marsh turned back for one final threat. This isn't finished, Blackwood. Hampton doesn't accept defeat easily. Neither do I, Ezra replied simply. After the bounty hunters disappeared down the drive, the group stood in silence for a moment, letting the magnitude of what had just happened sink in. Eva finally set down the rifle, her hands shaking now that the immediate danger had passed. Thank you, she said quietly, looking around at the faces of the men who'd stood up for her. All of you. I know you didn't have to. Yes, we did, Sheriff Morrison interrupted gently. It's the right thing to do, Miss Fairmont. And around here, we believe in doing what's right. As the sheriff and the other ranchers prepared to leave, each offering their continued support if needed, Ezra found himself alone with Eva in the gathering dusk. She stood silhouetted against the sunset, still wearing her ruined dress from the morning's farm work, looking nothing like the refined Boston socialite who'd arrived by accident just 2 days ago. Ezra, she said softly, I need you to know that I meant what I said out there about choosing to stay here, but I also need you to understand that Marsh was right about one thing. This probably isn't over. Reginald won't give up easily. Ezra stepped closer, close enough to see the flecks of gold in her green eyes. Eva, In 15 years of living alone, I convinced myself that solitude was enough, that a man could build a good life without risking his heart. He paused, reaching up to gently brush a tear from her cheek. I was wrong. These past 2 days with you have shown me what I've been missing, what I've been too afraid to hope for. What are you saying? I'm saying that if you'll have me, if you're truly willing to build a life here, then I want to build it with you. Not just as your protector, but as your partner. In everything. Ava's breath caught. Ezra, are you? I'm saying I love you, Evangeline Fairmont. I know it's fast. I know it's crazy, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. For a moment, Eva just stared at him, and Ezra felt his heart hammering against his ribs. Then she smiled, the first truly joyful smile he'd seen from her, and stood on her tiptoes to kiss him. I love you too, she whispered against his lips. And yes, I want to build a life here with you. But Ezra, what? We might want to invest in more ammunition. Something tells me we're going to need it. 3 weeks passed in what Ezra later described as the happiest time of his adult life. Eva had settled into ranch life with surprising adaptability, transforming from a refined Boston socialite into a capable frontier woman who could milk cows, mend fences, and handle a rifle with equal skill. They'd announced their engagement to the community, and the wedding was planned for the following month at the little church in Millerville. But their newfound happiness was shattered on a cold October morning when Tom Henderson arrived at dawn, his horse lathered with sweat and his face grim with urgency. Ezra, Eva, thank God you're both here, Tom gasped, dismounting in a rush. They're coming. A whole damn army of them. Eva's coffee cup slipped from her hands, shattering on the kitchen floor. How many? 12 men, maybe more. Marsh is leading them, but these aren't just hired thugs this time. Hampton sent professional guns, the kind that work for cattle barons and railroad companies. They rode through town an hour ago, asking no questions, just stating they'd be collecting Hampton's property today. Ezra felt ice form in his veins. What did Sheriff Morrison say? Morrison's laid up with a broken leg from that fall off his horse last week. His deputy is barely 18 and scared out of his wits. The town's not going to be any help this time. Eva stood abruptly, her face pale but determined. I have to leave. If I'm not here, there's no reason for violence. The hell you will, Ezra said firmly. We've been through this, Eva. You're not running anymore. But Ezra, 12 men, could be 20 for all I care, Ezra interrupted. This is our home now, our life. We don't give it up because some entitled bastard from Boston thinks he can buy whatever he wants. Tom looked between them, his expression troubled. Ezra, I admire your courage, but we need to be realistic here. Even if Bill Morrison and the other ranchers help, we'd be outnumbered 2-1. Then we'd better make sure every shot counts, Eva said quietly, surprising both men with her steel resolve. Tom, how long do we have? Maybe an hour, 2 at most. They stopped to rest their horses and get supplies. Ezra's mind raced through possibilities. The ranch house was well built and defensible, but not against that many professional gunmen. They needed an advantage, something to even the odds. The canyon, he said suddenly. Tom, remember that narrow pass where we used to hunt deer as boys? If we could get them to follow us there. Tom's eyes lit up with understanding. The rock slide area. If we positioned ourselves right, we could hold off an army from those heights. But how do we get them to follow us there, instead of just burning down the house? Eva asked practically. Ezra looked at her, admiration mixing with fear for her safety. We give them what they want, or make them think we are. An hour later, their hastily formed plan was in motion. Eva, wearing her traveling dress and carrying her original suitcase, walked slowly toward the tree line behind the house. To any watching eyes, it would appear she was trying to escape on foot toward the mountain trail that led to the canyon pass. Ezra and Tom were positioned on either side of the trail, armed with rifles and enough ammunition to hold a siege. The plan was simple. Let Marsh's men see Eva fleeing, follow her into the canyon where the terrain would neutralize their numerical advantage, then make their stand. The wait was agonizing. Ezra lay flat behind a fallen log, his rifle trained on the approach route, and tried not to think about all the things that could go wrong. Eva was the bait in their trap, and if the plan failed, she'd be the first one captured. The sound of hoofbeats announced their arrival. Marsh appeared first, leading his small army of hired guns through the ranch yard. They spread out with military precision, surrounding the house before approaching the front door. "Blackwood," Marsh called out. "We know you're in there. Send out the woman and no one has to get hurt." When no answer came, two men kicked in the front door while others circled to the back. The shouts of "empty" and "no one here" carried clearly across the distance. Then someone spotted Eva's tracks leading toward the mountains. "There!" one of the gunmen shouted, pointing toward the tree line. "Someone headed toward the pass." Marsh studied the trail through field glasses, and Ezra held his breath as the man made his decision. "6 men stay here in case this is a diversion. The rest of you, with me. If they think they can escape into the mountains, they're about to learn otherwise." 8 riders spurred their horses toward the canyon trail, exactly as Ezra had hoped. As they passed his position, he got a clear look at the men Hampton had sent. Hard-faced professionals with the kind of dead eyes that spoke of too much killing and too little conscience. The trail leading to the canyon was barely wide enough for single-file passage, with steep walls rising on both sides. Ezra and Tom moved parallel to the riders, staying hidden in the rocks above, while Eva led them deeper into the trap. When they reached the narrowest point of the canyon, Eva suddenly veered off the trail and scrambled up a steep slope to a protected ledge that Ezra had shown her the week before. It was their predetermined signal. The trap was set. "Now!" Ezra shouted and opened fire. His first shot took down Marsh's horse, sending the man tumbling into the rocks. Tom's rifle cracked simultaneously, and another rider went down. The narrow confines of the canyon turned into a deadly shooting gallery, with gunshots echoing off the stone walls like thunder. The professional gunmen tried to return fire, but they were trapped in the open with no cover except their fallen horses. Ezra and Tom had the high ground and knew every rock and crevice in the canyon from years of hunting. "Surrender now and you can ride out of here alive," Ezra called down during a lull in the shooting. "Go to hell!" Marsh snarled back, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. "Hampton's paying us too much to quit now." The battle resumed with desperate intensity. One of the gunmen tried to scale the canyon wall to flank their position, but Eva's rifle spoke from her ledge, the shot echoing with deadly accuracy. The man fell back with a cry of pain. "Good shot!" Tom called out, and Ezra felt a surge of pride in this woman who refused to be anyone's victim. But their ammunition was running low, and the remaining gunmen had found some cover behind the fallen horses. Worse, Ezra could hear the sound of approaching hoofbeats. The 6 men left at the ranch were coming to investigate the gunfire. "Tom, we need to end this fast," Ezra called across the canyon. "I'm down to my last 5 rounds," Tom replied grimly. That's when Eva made a decision that stopped Ezra's heart. She stood up on her ledge, clearly visible to the men below, and called out in a voice that carried the authority of her aristocratic upbringing. "Frederick Marsh! This is Evangeline Fairmont." All shooting stopped as every eye turned toward her. "I know Reginald Hampton sent you here with promises of easy money," Eva continued, her voice echoing off the canyon walls. "But look around you. Half your men are down, you're trapped in a canyon with nowhere to run, and reinforcements are coming from town to help us." It was a bluff. No reinforcements were coming, but Marsh couldn't know that. "Hampton lied to you about me being a helpless, confused woman," Eva pressed on. "I'm not going back to Boston, no matter how many men he sends. And every one of you who dies here dies for nothing more than one man's wounded pride." One of the younger gunmen, barely more than a boy, threw down his rifle. "I didn't sign up to die for some rich man's marriage problems." "Coward," Marsh snarled, but Ezra could see the doubt spreading among the remaining men. "Last chance," Ezra called out. "Throw down your weapons and ride out, or we'll finish this fight." The sound of approaching horses was getting closer. In moments, the remaining gunmen from the ranch would arrive and tip the odds back in Marsh's favor. This was their last opportunity to end it without more bloodshed. 3 more men threw down their weapons and raised their hands. Marsh looked around at his decimated force, rage and frustration warring on his battered face. "This isn't over," he said finally, struggling to his feet. "Hampton will never stop coming for her." "Then he'll keep losing men," Ezra replied simply, "because we'll never stop fighting for our freedom." As the defeated bounty hunters limped out of the canyon, collecting their wounded and leaving their dead, Eva scrambled down from her perch and ran to Ezra's arms. He held her tight, feeling the tremor in her body as the adrenaline finally wore off. "Is it over?" she whispered against his chest. Ezra looked toward the canyon mouth, where the sound of retreating hoofbeats was fading into the distance. "This part is." But Eva, Marsh was right about one thing. Hampton might keep trying. Eva pulled back to look at him, her green eyes blazing with determination. "Then we'll keep fighting. Together. For as long as it takes." As they walked out of the canyon hand in hand, with Tom following behind, Ezra realized that his 15 years of solitude had ended the moment Eva stepped off that wagon. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as they had this one. Together, unbroken and free. The Blackwood Ranch was truly home now, for both of them. Spring came early to the Montana Territory that year, painting the valley in shades of green that seemed to celebrate new life and fresh starts. 6 months had passed since the canyon battle, and word had filtered back through various channels that Reginald Hampton had finally given up his pursuit. Some said he'd found another heiress to terrorize into marriage. Others claimed he'd been forced to focus on business troubles that threatened his family's fortune. Ava didn't particularly care about the reasons. She was simply grateful that the shadow of her past had finally lifted. The morning of her wedding dawned clear and bright, with not a cloud in the endless Montana sky. Ava stood at the bedroom window of the house that had become her home, watching Ezra and Tom Henderson set up chairs in the ranch yard for the ceremony. She'd insisted on an outdoor wedding, wanting to exchange vows surrounded by the mountains and meadows that had given them both a new chance at happiness. "You sure you don't want to wear Mama's dress?" asked Sarah Henderson, Tom's sister, who had become Eva's closest friend in the territory. "It's beautiful, and it would be such an honor." Eva smiled, touching the simple white dress she'd sewn herself. "Thank you, Sarah, but this feels right. I made it with my own hands, just like I'm making this new life with my own choices." The dress was indeed simple, white cotton with pearl buttons and delicate embroidery that Eva had worked on during the long winter evenings. It bore no resemblance to the elaborate gown with French lace and imported silk that her mother had commissioned for her original wedding to Reginald Hampton. That monstrosity was still hanging in a Boston wardrobe, a symbol of a life she'd rejected and never looked back on. Through the window, she could see guests beginning to arrive. The entire community had turned out for the celebration. Ranchers and their families from across the valley. The new sheriff who'd replaced Morrison when he decided to retire. Even the pastor from the church in Millerville who'd made the journey specifically to perform the ceremony. "Eva, honey, there's someone here to see you," Sarah said, returning from downstairs with a puzzled expression. "Says she's your cousin from Denver?" Eva's heart skipped a beat. She hurried downstairs to find a woman in traveling clothes standing nervously in the parlor. Margaret Fairmont, her father's niece, whom Eva hadn't seen in 3 years. "Margaret!" Eva embraced her cousin warmly, then stepped back with concern. "What are you doing here?" "How did you even find me?" Margaret smiled through tears. "I hired a detective after you disappeared. Not for the reasons you think," she added quickly, seeing Eva's alarmed expression. "I wanted to make sure you were safe. When I learned what Father tried to do to you, forcing that marriage to Hampton. You know about that. The whole family knows. Uncle Robert's business dealings with Hampton fell through spectacularly after you left. Turns out Hampton was embezzling from his own companies to finance his lifestyle. He's ruined now, completely disgraced. Father realizes he was trying to marry you off to cover his own financial crimes." Eva sank into a chair, overwhelmed by this news. "And my parents?" Margaret's expression grew sad. "Your mother misses you terribly. Your father, well, he's stubborn as always, but I think he's starting to realize he made a terrible mistake. They received your letter about the wedding." "They did." Eva had sent the letter weeks ago, but hadn't expected any response. Margaret reached into her traveling bag and pulled out a small wrapped package. Your mother sent this. She said it was her mother's, and she wants you to have it for your wedding day. With trembling fingers, Ava unwrapped the package to reveal a delicate silver locket engraved with tiny flowers. Inside was a miniature portrait of her grandmother, the strong-willed woman who taught Ava to read when such education was considered unnecessary for girls. She also sent a message, Margaret continued softly. She said to tell you that love is worth any sacrifice, and she hopes you found the happiness that was denied to her. Ava wiped away tears, her heart full of bittersweet emotion. Will you stay for the ceremony? I wouldn't miss it. I want to meet this man who was brave enough to fight the entire Hampton fortune for your hand. An hour later, Eva stood at the back of the gathering, her arm linked through Tom Henderson's. In the absence of her own father, Tom had volunteered to walk her down the makeshift aisle, and she'd been touched by the gesture from this man who'd become like a brother to her. At the front of the assembled guests, Ezra waited beside Pastor Williams. He wore his best suit, the one he'd bought for his parents' funeral 15 years ago, and had never had occasion to wear since. His dark hair was neatly combed, his beard trimmed, but it was his eyes that took Eva's breath away. They shone with love and wonder, as if he still couldn't quite believe this day was real. As they began the walk down the aisle, Eva noticed the faces of their guests. Mrs. Henderson dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Sheriff Morrison, despite his retirement, had made the trip to see young Blackwood finally get the happiness he deserved. The other ranchers stood with their hats in their hands, their weathered faces soft with approval for this union that had brought such joy to their isolated community. But it was Ezra's expression that held her attention as she approached the makeshift altar they'd constructed beneath the old oak tree. His face showed 15 years of loneliness melting away, replaced by hope and love and the promise of shared tomorrows. Dearly beloved, Pastor Williams began, his voice carrying clearly across the ranch yard. We are gathered here today to witness the union of Ezra Blackwood and Evangeline Fairmont in holy matrimony. The ceremony was traditional in structure, but uniquely their own in spirit. When it came time for vows, they'd chosen to write their own rather than recite standard words. Ezra spoke first, his voice steady despite the emotion Eva could see in his eyes. Eva, when you got off at the wrong stop 6 months ago, you didn't just arrive at my ranch, you arrived at my heart. You brought light into my darkness, laughter into my silence, and love into a life I thought was complete in its solitude. I promise to stand beside you through whatever storms may come, to protect what we've built together, and to love you more with each passing day. Ava's voice trembled slightly as she responded, but her words were clear and strong. Ezra, you gave me shelter when I had nowhere to run, but more than that, you gave me the freedom to choose my own path. You saw strength in me when I felt weak, courage when I felt afraid, and worth when the world told me I had none. I promise to be your partner in all things, to stand with you against any challenge, and to fill your life with the love and joy you so richly deserve. Pastor Williams smiled as he pronounced them husband and wife. Ezra, you may kiss your bride. The kiss they shared was sweet and tender, full of promise for the future they would build together. The guests erupted in cheers and applause, and someone, Eva suspected it was old Pete McKenzie, fired a rifle shot into the air in celebration. The reception that followed was a true frontier celebration. Tables groaned under the weight of food contributed by every family in attendance. There was dancing to fiddle music, toasts with whiskey and elderberry wine, and storytelling that lasted well into the evening. As the sun began to set behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Ezra and Eva found themselves alone for a moment on the porch of their home. Any regrets? Ezra asked, pulling her close. Eva laughed, a sound of pure joy. Only that I didn't get on the wrong train sooner. Mrs. Blackwood, Ezra said, testing out her new name. I like the sound of that, Eva replied, then grew serious. Ezra, I have something to tell you. Something wonderful. He looked at her with curiosity and growing hope. I'm going to have a baby, she said softly. Our baby. For a moment, Ezra was speechless. Then he whooped with joy, picked her up and spun her around on the porch while she laughed and protested that he'd make her dizzy. When? He asked, setting her down gently. Early winter, I think. Just in time for Christmas. That night, as they lay in their marriage bed listening to the last of their guests departing and the distant sounds of cattle settling for the night, Eva reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her to this moment. 6 months ago, she'd been a frightened woman fleeing an unwanted marriage, carrying nothing but a suitcase and desperate hope. Now she was Mrs. Ezra Blackwood, loved and cherished, carrying their child, and looking forward to a future bright with possibility. Eva? Ezra's voice was soft in the darkness. I was thinking about what you said, about getting off at the wrong stop. What about it? Maybe it wasn't the wrong stop after all. Maybe it was exactly where you were supposed to be. Eva turned in his arms, pressing her face against his chest where she could hear the steady beat of his heart. Maybe some things that look like mistakes are really just destiny taking a longer route. I love you, Mrs. Blackwood. I love you too, Mr. Blackwood. Outside, the Montana wind whispered through the valley, carrying the scent of wildflowers and the promise of summer. The Blackwood Ranch was no longer the domain of a lonely man talking to his cattle. It was a home filled with love, laughter, and the bright promise of the future. And in the months and years that followed, as their family grew and their love deepened, Eva would often reflect on that moment of supposed confusion when she'd asked the wagon driver about Fairmont Ranch. The truth was, she'd always known she was looking for the Blackwood Ranch. Something deep in her heart had guided her to exactly where she needed to be, not to a place on a map, but to a home in Ezra's arms. Sometimes the best destinations are the ones you never planned to reach, and sometimes getting lost is the only way to find yourself. In Eva's case, one wrong train had led to a lifetime of right choices, and she wouldn't change a single moment of the journey that had brought her home. And so ends the remarkable tale of Ezra Blackwood and Evangeline Fairmont, a story that proves sometimes the most beautiful journeys begin with getting completely lost. When Eva stepped off that wagon 6 months earlier, asking about Fairmont Ranch in a valley where no such place existed, neither she nor Ezra could have imagined the extraordinary love story that would unfold. What started as a simple case of mistaken directions became something far more profound, a testament to the power of choice, courage, and the unexpected ways that destiny can disguise itself as accident. Ezra's story resonates with anyone who's ever felt forgotten by the world. For 15 long years, he'd convinced himself that solitude was enough, that a man could build a meaningful life without risking his heart. He'd created a comfortable prison of routine and resignation, talking to his cattle because he'd forgotten what it felt like to have a human conversation that mattered. But isolation, no matter how carefully constructed, is no match for love when it finally arrives. Eva didn't just bring companionship to Ezra's lonely ranch. She brought transformation. She showed him that the walls he'd built to protect himself from pain were also keeping him from joy, from purpose, from the very experiences that make life worth living. Eva's journey is equally powerful, representing every person who's ever had to choose between security and authenticity. She could have stayed in Boston, married Reginald Hampton, and lived a life of material comfort purchased with her freedom. Instead, she chose uncertainty over oppression, frontier hardship over gilded captivity. Her transformation from sheltered socialite to capable frontier woman wasn't just about learning to milk cows and handle a rifle. It was about discovering her own strength. Every fence she mended, every meal she cooked, every challenge she faced alongside Ezra was proof that she was far more capable than the world had ever allowed her to be. The romance between Ezra and Eva works because it's built on mutual respect and shared values, rather than just physical attraction. They fell in love not despite their differences, but because of how those differences made them stronger together. Ezra's steadiness grounded Eva's adventurous spirit, while her courage helped him rediscover his own capacity for hope. Their story also highlights the importance of community in frontier life. When danger threatened, it wasn't just Ezra who stood up for Eva. It was Tom Henderson, Sheriff Morrison, and the entire network of neighbors who understood that protecting one meant protecting all. The American frontier spirit wasn't just about individual toughness. It was about people taking care of each other when the world got dangerous. The battle with Hampton's hired guns serves as more than just exciting action. it represents the broader struggle between Old World privilege and New World freedom. Hampton represented the entitled class that believed money could buy anything, including people. His defeat wasn't just a personal victory for Eva and Ezra. It was a triumph of frontier values over corrupt power. But perhaps the most beautiful aspect of their story is how it redefines the concept of home. For Ezra, home had been a place of solitude and memories. For Eva, it had been a prison of expectations and restrictions. Together, they created something entirely new, a home built on choice, love, and shared dreams. The arrival of their baby represents more than just the next chapter in their love story. It symbolizes hope, continuity, and the beautiful possibility that comes when two people create something greater than themselves. That child will grow up in a home where love is freely given, where strength is measured by character rather than gender, and where the most important lessons are taught through example rather than lectures. Eva's pregnancy also provides perfect symmetry to the story's themes. She arrived at the ranch carrying secrets and running from a forced future. Now she carries new life and runs toward chosen possibilities. The transformation is complete, from victim to victor, from captive to creator of her own destiny. The reunion with her family, represented by Cousin Margaret's visit, shows that Eva's choices had consequences beyond her own life. Her courage to reject an arranged marriage exposed Hampton's corruption and freed other potential victims from his schemes. Sometimes standing up for yourself creates ripples that protect others you'll never even meet. Their wedding, held outdoors under the Montana sky with the entire community in attendance, represents everything their love story embodies: authenticity over artifice, community over isolation, hope over fear. The simple ceremony was more meaningful than any elaborate Boston society wedding could have been, because it celebrated real love rather than financial arrangements. The circular nature of the story's ending, Eva reflecting on how getting lost actually led her exactly where she needed to be, speaks to a deeper truth about life's journey. Sometimes what looks like failure, confusion, or even disaster is actually the universe's way of steering us towards something better than we ever dared to imagine. For modern readers, Ezra and Eva's story offers valuable lessons about taking chances, standing up for what's right, and being brave enough to change course when life isn't working. Their willingness to fight for their love, both literally and figuratively, reminds us that the best things in life are worth defending. Their tale also celebrates the transformative power of being truly seen and accepted by another person. Ezra saw Eva's strength when the world saw only a confused woman. Eva saw Ezra's capacity for love when he saw only a lonely rancher. They gave each other permission to become their best selves. As we leave Ezra and Eva beginning their new life together, with a baby on the way and a community that supports them, we're reminded that every ending is also a beginning. Their story may be complete, but their life together is just starting. So the next time you find yourself on the wrong train, at the wrong stop, or seemingly lost in life's journey, remember Evangeline Fairmont. Sometimes the most beautiful destinations are the ones we never planned to reach, and sometimes getting lost is the only way to find where we truly belong. If this story of accidental love, frontier courage, and second chances touched your heart, let me know in the comments below. Share your thoughts about taking chances, standing up for what's right, and the courage it takes to build the life you truly want. Until next time, remember that home isn't always a place. Sometimes it's a person brave enough to fight for your happiness. Keep your hearts open and your courage ready. You never know when destiny might disguise itself as a wrong turn.